Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson, and we're brought to you by Pick6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. You can use code RWPICKS for $50 in Pick6 credits with a $5 deposit. My guest this week is Collazo of Baseball America. We're going to be talking all things 2024 MLB Draft. That's coming up here in less than 2 weeks. Really excited for that. Carlos and the crew over there have been putting out awesome content as usual. And Carlos, as you know, I don't follow the draft year round. So when I was kind of going in for my first sort of passes on these players, it really stood out to me just how insane the hitting numbers were for the college position players in the class. And it just really kind of seemed like even more over the top than usual. And then I saw some articles from you and from Jeff Ponce about the run scoring environment in college right now, all the different factors that kind of go into that with, hot bats, hot balls. Obviously, there are some smaller parks. And so can you kind of talk about just that run scoring environment in college baseball? Because it does seem like the strength of this draft is the college position players and, actually bat first position players at that.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I do think that you probably should be very cautious if you are looking at offensive numbers for college hitters and comparing them to like some draft classes from 5 years ago or so, just because you're probably going to get the incorrect assumption that these are like players who are markedly better than that draft class. I do think it is a strong college hitting class. It's probably a solid average or maybe slightly above average group for that demographic specifically. But yeah, contextualizing them accurately, just given the run environment in college baseball, is a challenge, because I think JJ Cooper has written about this really well for us, just trying to put it into perspective. But the offensive environment in college baseball this year and last year are the most offensive friendly we've had since the Gorilla Ball era. You could even say that like this year specifically is a more offense friendly, home run friendly era than the Gorilla Ball era, which is just crazy to say and to think. It was just such a different time, and the NCAA added some new equipment rules to try and counter that because it was starting to get a little bit dangerous. I know JJ has written that like the NCAA probably needs to do the same thing now. There are a lot of factors that are going into why it's so hot. I think the two most obvious and most common theories for this are the baseball is just a little bit livelier now, and the bats are a little bit hotter. There are lots of allegations about teams who are cheating. There are companies who advertise shaving bats to try and magnify or amplify the trampoline effect with college baseball bats. I mean, that it's not hard to find the companies who do this and to figure that out. There are lots of allegations in college baseball that teams are cheating to do this. I think it's this weird environment where teams have a lot of data and a lot of tools available to them, but there's also less oversight than like MLB. Like the NCAA is not capable of overseeing the game in the same way that MLB is able to. So you really get into this kind of Wild West situation where offensive numbers are crazy, exit velocity data is crazy. And I think from like an evaluation perspective, we've talked to a lot of teams on how do you guys translate college exit velocity data to the pro? How do you do it from metal to wood? I think there were a lot of teams who a few years ago had a pretty comfortable way to just translate metal bat exit velocity data to wood. This year it's a little bit wonkier, and it seems like for pro teams the best way to do that is just to simply look at where college hitters stack up with everyone else. Like the exit velocity data, maybe you don't translate one for one, but if you've got a guy who is consistently topping the lists, that still tells you something, even if you assume some of these exit velocity numbers are going to change fairly dramatically or significantly once they get into pro ball with a wood bat and a more consistent baseball. So these are all things that the teams have in mind. I don't think you can look at a 30 homer or a 25 homer season from a college player this year and think it's automatically the same as like that sort of season from maybe 10 years ago or so.
Do you think that there are certain teams, picking in the top 10 or so, where there's just so much kind of concern about where the false positives are among these college hitters that they might just kind of lean towards pitching or prep position players just to kind of not have to worry about making a huge mistake based on all those contextual factors you just mentioned?
I don't think so. I think the teams are pretty savvy about how they're going to handle that. I think, like, if you are concerned about that, there's still, like, you still have your scouts to rely on. The scouts aren't out there like staring at a TrackMan screen, putting their reports in based on exit velocity. Like, there's still a lot of things you can do to actually just scout them up like you typically would. All the scouts who are on the ground have seen all these players over the last 5-10 years, and I think they have a pretty good idea of how to compare and contrast. You can still evaluate a hit tool reasonably well, or obviously that's the tool that's hardest to actually analyze and project moving forward. But I don't think so. Like, I think the analysts have a pretty good idea of how to do it. I think everyone is kind of aware of the offensive environment, and there are ways that you can just adjust for like a WRC plus equivalent sort of statistic. Like, you can neutralize these stats and figure out still who is standing out more than another player. Like, I think there are ways you can kind of figure those things out. So I wouldn't expect, like, if a team really wanted to go college hitter but was just kind of scared of the environment, they'd pivot off entirely, especially because, like, maybe in the top 10 there are a few arms like Hagen Smith and Chase Burns who are really compelling, but throughout the first round, especially in the top 20 or so, there are not a lot of high school hitters in this class who fit in that range on talent. So if you want to bat in the first round, like a lot of teams increasingly do, like to go hitting very early on, because just those guys, you run out of the good hitters really quickly. I don't think you have the fallback options on the high school side, and that is one of the reasons why this draft class is a little bit weaker than normal, because the high school class is just so scarce at the very top, I think. So I would imagine if you want hitters, there's still going to be some college hitters that are appealing for these teams picking in the top 20 or so, and I expect it to be a pretty college hitter heavy first round this year.
So you had a really useful article go up on BA, one of my favorite draft articles I've read this spring, back on June 5th. I think it was titled Revisiting Power, Contact, and Chase Rates for Hot 2024 College Baseball Hitters. There's a great scatter plot in there where you've got, contact, power, and chase rates for all these top college hitters. And you can kind of see the guys that have sort of the outlier, high chase rates and outlier 90th percentile EVs and stuff like that. I thought that was very useful. What specifically are you looking for? Maybe it's a few stats. Maybe there's just a range, like a high a chase rate level where you're just not comfortable going up there. Maybe you're really weighing what guys did in the Cape Cod League. Are there a few things that you really look for to kind of feel very comfortable about which of these hitters are going to translate to the next level?
Yeah, a year ago, I think I would have told you the guys who kind of check all these boxes I feel pretty confident about. But we've had a few players that just, they check all these boxes in college and then go into pro ball and just don't hit. Guys like Jacob Berry, he looked like a pretty well-rounded hitter at the amateur level. Nolan Shanuel is actually a player who looked really great on this chart in terms of exit velocity in college, in terms of contact, in terms of chase. Like, he was the guy a year ago who like checked all these boxes, and now he's like this light hitting first baseman that I'm not sure like what his value is moving forward. So I think it is useful to see how these players stack up against one another. I think as I've done this sort of piece for a few years now, I've tried to maybe pump the brakes in terms of the confidence this gives me and how this translates to pro ball, because the pro game is just so different. I still think it can be informative. I just wouldn't take it as like gospel. It's more of, I've said this a few times over the past few weeks or so, like all this data is more of a snapshot of a point in time for these players than like a static attribute for them moving forward. Like, all these guys are still going to change. They're still going to grow. They're still going to evolve. I think even with the competition levels in college baseball, there's such a difference in SEC pitching and SEC competition versus like a mid-major, even like Pac-12 pitching. It's so different. And so it can make the data maybe a little bit noisier than it is at the pro level. And so it's not like a one-to-one comparison. But I think it is interesting to see a guy like Jack Caglianone, how he ranks in terms of raw power and exit velocity at the top, and how that chase rate is still a bit scary. Like, that tells you a little bit about how he is as a hitter. Seeing guys like JJ Wetherholt and Travis Bazzana towards the top right of this scatter plot, guys like Nick Kurtz who hit the ball hard, make a lot of contact, have great recognition in zone. I think for some teams, maybe this can be illuminating. Like, which of these elements, in terms of bat to ball skills, in terms of power, in terms of swing decisions, like what can you do well as a player development group? Which are the players who are maybe areas to get some value and to help improve them? I think some teams have shown a nice ability to help players hit for more contact. The Orioles in general have done a really nice job in recent years, taking some players who hit the ball hard, and just helping them get to that contact a little bit more often. So does that mean for them players like a Dakota Jordan or a Jared Jones or Vance Honeycutt, like these guys in the top left who hit the ball hard when they do make contact, are those more compelling? For me, I like to just see players who do each of these things well, and also profile up the middle, just to give them a lot of avenues for success. So yeah, in general for me, I'm looking at how often do you make contact, how hard can you hit the ball, what is your like power projection moving forward, because again, there are some players who are like lean and tall and lanky and you expect they're going to pack on weight, and maybe add power in the future. I think power is probably the last thing to come for a lot of hitters. And then what's your approach like, and is it approach that is fixable? Can you refine it a little bit, or are you just going to always be a free swinger? And if you are, do you have the requisite power and contact skills to make up for that approach? So all of it's super fascinating to me. I don't think there's like a one obvious answer. And again, like it's so hard for me to just be super confident in anyone, just given some of the misses we've had in the past. So
yeah, I went back and looked at the the top 4 college hitters taken in each draft from 2016 to 2022. And I think there's an over 50% bust rate just among the top 4 college hitters taken in these drafts. And if you took out the Orioles picks, like the Orioles account for some of the better ones in Adley and Kauser and Kierstead, like they're doing a great job. But I think one thing you mentioned, up the middle players, and then you also talked about the Pac-12 even. You got Spencer Torkelson and Andrew Vaughn. Those guys were seemingly about as can't miss as it gets offensively. And so I just think it's kind of, when I first started analyzing the draft for fantasy, it was college position players are the safest way to go. That maybe is still the case, but it's kind of startling how high that bust rate is among these top picks. I don't know if you think that's something teams are going to be getting better at, or I mean, obviously like the 2017, 2016 classes were pretty terrible. And then like 2022, you mentioned Jacob Berry, but like Gavin Cross, Kevin Parada, a couple other, bad picks there. I don't know. Do you think teams are going to get better at this, or is this just something we got to keep in the back of our minds? Like even the guys that seem really, really can't miss, it's not that easy.
Yeah, I think the latter point is the right one. Like, just look at the overall hit rates for just the draft throughout history. Like, it's not a great rate. It's not like 50% of these guys are making it. It's more like a third or a quarter of these guys who are taken in the first round actually wind up being like quality major league players in some capacity. So I think it's just a good reminder that like it's really hard to evaluate and project these players, and the miss rate in general of prospects. Like just establishing like a baseline of how often these guys actually pan out is really important to keep in mind. So you don't it's probably easy to assume like a first round player is going to become a big leaguer in some capacity, but just so many of these guys miss. Like you said, with the Orioles, they've done such a good job of taking guys who are non-consensus players in the top 10. Like Adley Rutschman was a clear like slam dunk, like quasi-generational talent that was like an obvious no-brainer at the number 1 spot that year. But even then, like Gunnar Henderson was taken in the second round. He might be a better player than Adley Rutschman now. And guys like Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad, we had them ranked in the 10 to 20 range. We did not think of them as consistent like top 5 players where they were taken. And at the time I'm like, oh, like why'd you pass on guys like Austin Martin? Like these are players who like at the time I'd have been like, oh, this guy's a clear cut, like take him number 2. So I just think like not getting overly confident in your evaluations of a college player, a high school player is really important. Keeping an open mind and understanding that there's still so much work to do for all these players. And maybe the one profile that I've become most skeptical of, just after looking at these hit rates and some of these players who I was super confident in at the time, are college first basemen in the first round. That demographic specifically has such a bad hit rate. And it's like cognitive dissonance for me now because with a guy like Nick Kurtz at Wake Forest, he checks all of the boxes I love. I think he's got a great approach. I think he hits the ball hard. I think he's got great contact skills. I think he can manipulate the barrel well, pick up pitches well. But it is just so like you have to hit at such a high level if you're playing first base that like even if you do wind up being a pretty good hitter, you can't just be pretty good at first base because you're competing with MLB veteran first baseman. You're competing with every single player who's moving down the defensive spectrum. It's just such a high bar to clear at that position that not only do you have to feel confident in the offensive evaluation, it has to be like an incredibly impactful offensive profile. So that's just it's a very tough profile in the draft in general. And we've got two this year between Jack Caglianone and Nick Kurtz who could go top 10.
Yeah, I echo pretty much everything you said there. The college first base profile, especially the guy that sort of is already kind of physically maxed out. Just it is scary when you look at like the last 10 drafts or so. We got to head to a message from our sponsors. When we come back, I'm going to ask Carlos a bit more about these specific players who are going to go high in the draft. So keep it tuned here. Did you ever play the over-under game with your friends? You know, think I can eat that slice of pizza in under 30 seconds, or I know it'll take you over a minute to down that 2-liter. If you have, then you're going to love Pick 6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Here's how to play during baseball season. Pick between 2 and 6 players and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat, like runs, hits, strikeouts, and more. Track your picks and play against others for a shot to win huge cash prizes. That's all there is to it. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app and use code RWPICKS. New customers play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. That's code RWPICKS for new customers to play $5 and get 50 in Pick 6 credits. Only on DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours. One per customer. Non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 18 plus in most eligible states, not available in all states, including New York and Connecticut. Eligibility restrictions apply. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.com or .draftkings.com/promos. Can certain weather conditions lead to more home runs? The atmosphere can affect how far a baseball flies by 20%. Home Run Forecast measures the weather conditions at a ballpark to tell us if the atmosphere is good or bad for ball flight during a game. An index value that rates the air is created for each game and ballpark and is displayed on a scale from 1 to 10. Home Run Forecast's premium site offers index values by the hour for each game, 24-hour forecast, wind direction and speed, and even whether the roof will be open at certain stadiums. Home Run Forecast is offering a special for the start of the baseball season. You can get access to the premium site for the entire season for only $28, a savings of nearly 30%. Go to homerunforecast.com/RotoWire now to sign up. We've launched a new RotoWire Picks app. It offers recommendations and predictions for fantasy pick'em and player props on platforms like Prize Picks, BetMGM, and more, covering just about every sport. It's free to download on Apple and Android. Sign up within the app for a subscription to unlock all features. Existing RotoWire.com DFS Picks subscribers get instant full access with their login. Check it out now. Okay, we're back with Carlos Collazo of Baseball America. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate that. So, Carlos, I think Charlie Condon, outfielder out of Georgia, is the guy that I think from a dynasty standpoint, I think if there was a consensus, I think he would maybe be the top guy. Mm-hmm. But how safe of a bet do you? I mean, I know we just kind of talked about how none of these guys are safe bets, but like, is this a guy that you would stack up with some of the best college hitters to come out in recent years, or is it not even that cut and dry to you that he's the top kind of bet to be a middle of the order run producer?
Yeah, he certainly has had one of the most impressive offensive seasons in recent memory. I mean, he's going to set a lot of records for college hitters in the bonus pool era who are taking top 30 just in terms of like career average. I think in that pool of players that I'm talking about, there are only 2 players that have had a career average over 400, and both of those players have come from mid-major programs, and both those players also have smaller sample size. It's like Chase DeLauder out of James Madison, and it's Zach Neto, I believe, out of Campbell. Like the fact that Charlie Condon has a greater sample size in college than both those 2 players and hit over 400 in the SEC is super compelling. The fact that he's going to have the highest career slugging percentage is pretty compelling. Again, you do have to look at the fact that it's a different era, but even Matt Eddy, he's done some kind of like weighted averages and just trying to neutralize the offensive environment. And Charlie Condon's season is like one of the best since Chris Bryant, who did it in like the exact opposite college baseball environment we're talking about here. So I do think he's a pretty compelling prospect. I know throughout the season, because he's improved so much as an athlete, because he has shown a lot of defensive versatility and just continued to show an ability to be a plus hitter with sort of elite power, has put him in the same kind of Wyatt Langford, Dylan Cruz tier of players. So some scouts certainly do view him in that sort of tier. It's hard for me personally to get quite there. I just think there was a difference in the swings between Langford and Cruz. It's also just a bit unusual to see a hitter who is as tall with this right profile. Like the 2 guys I can think of who are as big as him and have these sort of long levers would be Chris Bryant and Alec Boehm. I mean, maybe the fact that it's those 2 is more encouraging to people because they both panned out and been pretty good. But I think he has all the tools to fit as a top of the class prospect. I mean, he's got a chance for plus hitting ability. I think he has some of the best raw power in this class, and his ability to access that power has been more consistent than players around him. Like one scout said, the reason Charlie Condon is one is because he's got the raw power of Jack Caglianone, but is a much better pure hitter. The fact that he's got a chance to play third base, and even if not, he can play multiple other defensive positions. I think it's probably going to be a corner outfielder at the end of the day, just given his size, given his speed. But the athleticism he's shown this spring has been another factor in helping kind of push him up the board, because a year ago this time he was like a first base only prospect, and the fact that he's played third, left, right, center, and first a lot of games and looked pretty good at all of them, I think really helps the profile for him.
Yeah, he doesn't seem like a stiff out there. Like he does seem like there's some athleticism there, and that's interesting about how tall he is and the right on right thing. Because there aren't that many guys like that. I was surprised when I was looking back at those past draft classes. You could make a case that Alec Boehm was one of the best college ROI picks, of the past 7 or 8 years, and I would have never guessed that at the time.
Absolutely.
But, so that's interesting. I mean, Condon, he does not seem like a Guardians type of guy to me.
Yeah.
They never really invest in corner outfield stuff. So I think I like the Wetherholt call that you have right there. But
I hope that one happens, because we've had that one for a little bit now. We keep hearing some buzz on it. They are really tricky to figure out at number 1. I still think that they have not made a decision and probably won't until either the day before or draft day itself. But man, this year it does feel like there's just a wider group of players that's still being considered for that pick. I'm not sure if it's just because all these players at the top are still pretty close together, or just like a symptom of like Cleveland's process, how they do things. But either way, it has been very tricky to get a read on this class. And because there's like a top 10 group of players, and because there's still so many players seemingly involved number 1, the teams behind have had a really tough time narrowing down their field. So it just kind of balloons out a lot earlier than you typically do. Like in 23, we knew exactly who the first 5 players off the board were going to be. And so you felt a little bit more confident in that 6 to 15 range with mock drafts. This year, it's like, it's crazy from the top. So it's going to be very difficult. I think it'll be very chaotic on draft day, which is hopefully good for people who are just kind of watching more casually.
Yeah, for people that are out there, you don't have to weigh in on this, but people that might want to gamble on who goes first, I'm looking at the DraftKings odds, and it's Travis Bazzana plus 135, JJ Wetherholt plus 150 are the 2 favorites. And I want to actually ask you about those 2 guys. We touched on Charlie Condon, but I've really kind of found myself gravitating towards JJ Wetherholt of West Virginia.
A fellow believer.
Great. Yeah. I mean, he just checks all the things I'm kind of looking for to feel semi-confident about it translating. I love the speed. I love, maybe he ends up at second base, but I like the fact that, maybe shortstop is a slight possibility still. And it seems like there's room for him to kind of improve. Like he's not a finished product. Like I think he could improve as a power hitter. So I'm curious, like how close do you think he and Oregon State's Travis Bazzana are just in terms of the stuff that fantasy managers care about?
Yeah, I think they're exceptionally close. I mean, we have Bazzana ranked number 2 on the board. In our recent update this week, we have Wetherholt 3. Entering the season, JJ Wetherholt was number 1 on our board, just given his immaculate track record of hitting. What really surprised me when I saw JJ Wetherholt last summer was the amount of strength he has in his hands and wrists and forearms. Like his power with wood bat was encouraging. And it's funny because me and Peter Flaherty, who's also a Baseball America and does work on the college and draft side, we were talking. He's always been like a Bazzana guy. He's seen him in the Cape. I've always been more of a Wetherholt guy. And we were kind of talking about the pros and cons in their profile. And over the offseason, for me, one of the biggest differentiators was the fact that JJ Wetherholt hit for power to the opposite field much more frequently than Bazzana did. And I think there's a really interesting conversation to be had around Travis Bazzana, who has seemingly like optimized his launch angles and gets the ball in the air to the pull side much more consistently than JJ Wetherholt now. Whether or not that's a pro for Bazzana or a pro for Wetherholt, I think depends on like who you're inclined to like to begin with and what you think about player development, because in terms of contact, chase rate, power, swing, like they're all really, really close, or both these guys are really close on the underlying data. But if you wanted to say like, oh, there's room to be improved for JJ Wetherholt's power upside because he has not fully optimized those launch angles just yet, I think you could argue that. You could also argue the exact opposite way and say Wetherholt can't do that, and Bazzana has proven ability to do that, so he's going to get to his power more. So that is one that I don't know that I have a strong opinion either way. I'm sure like player development groups and scouting groups are going to have maybe more strong opinions on which is preferable there. But they're super interesting to compare because they're both great athletes. They're both plus runners. They're both middle infielders who, like with Bazzana, he's only played second base and probably is not going to play shortstop. With Wetherholt, he actually looked pretty good at shortstop this spring. Then maybe the biggest differentiator outside of the defensive profile is just the fact that JJ has been limited by some hamstring injuries both last summer and this spring. Like, how much does that concern you? So it's a fascinating conversation to be had. The way they do it looks a little bit different, but kind of the overall tool set is actually shockingly similar with both. So I'll be very curious to see where they go on draft day and to watch their careers over the next 5 years or so and see how they pan out. Because I think in terms of pure hit tool, these are the top 2 players in the class.
How would you compare the caliber of pitching they've each faced in their college careers?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that both of them have pretty extensive summer track records is helping with this. I would say in general, like Wetherholt has probably faced more consistently better pitching at West Virginia than Bazzana. I may be a little bit more skeptical recently of like the Pac-12 pitching. Certainly Charlie Condon, like having the SEC is great. It maybe has more like granular differences. Wetherholt doing well with Team USA and in his limited time in summer ball is encouraging. Bazzana has just hit everywhere he's ever been, so it's hard to look at him and say, oh, he's like a product of Pac-12, which isn't as good as SEC. I don't think that's fair. So it's close. I think one thing we looked at this year was like we were actually looking at Condon versus Bazzana, and when Travis Bazzana faced NCAA tournament teams, his strikeout rate did go up by quite a bit. So maybe that is an element that you could look at. But in terms of like average velocity faced, Charlie Condon certainly faced more. Travis Bazzana's was quite a bit less. But I don't think the gap between what JJ Wetherholt has seen throughout his college career and what Travis Bazzana has seen, just in terms of average fastball velocity and like number of like 93 plus mile per hour fastballs, is super different.
So we talked about it a little bit before the break. You brought up Nick Kurtz and Jack Caglianone, the 2 first base prospects that are going to go pretty high, and they do kind of have a different skill set in terms of Caglianone hits these just crazy bombs and has the crazy EVs, but he's also got the high chase rate, and then Kurtz is more kind of, I guess, well-rounded. How would you? Like if you're on the clock, if you're a big league team and you're like, let's get our first baseman of the future here, which way are you leaning? Like which way? It's almost kind of like which guy's least likely to bust.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a fun one to have as well. This is why this draft class of the top 10 is so fun, because there are a lot of profiles that are pretty similar. You could do this with with these two first basemen. You could do it with the high school hitters. You could do it with our top two pitchers. But for me, I've consistently been more on the Nick Kurtz side of things. Like I talked about earlier, there's just a lot of comfort that you get because he sees the ball well. Because even if the hit tool like doesn't translate perfectly, I think there is a floor of like on base skill that he has. I do think he has plus raw power. I think Cags has more raw power in the tank. And the fact that he's been able to access his power in the SEC is encouraging. But I think the biggest like red flag or yellow flag, however you want to signify it with their offensive profiles between the two, is Jack's chase. He's an extremely aggressive hitter. The fact that he was able to cut his strikeout rate and up his walk rate this spring, I think, is encouraging. But even still, if you look kind of under the hood a little bit, he is so much more aggressive than a guy like Kurtz. I just wonder how that's going to translate to pro ball and to better pitching when pitchers are better able to take advantage of that and challenge him more consistently with quality stuff. Even like mechanically, Cags pulls out a lot more often with the lower half. I think these are all like fixable things mechanically. And he also has the two-way element of where I think if you really want to dream on players and you want to dream on upside, Caglianone is probably the pick because he's spent his time in college being a pitcher and a hitter. And that's something that Nick Kurtz has never had to do. And I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that once you're focusing on just one, there are a lot of strides to be made. It's kind of the anti-Paul Skeens. When he put down the bat and focused on pitching, he looked like a completely different pitcher a year ago. If you think that can happen with Jack as a hitter, he's got a chance to lead the league in home runs in a way that I don't think Nick Kurtz does. Doesn't have that sort of like premium power upside, but I also think Nick Kurtz is a plus defender at first base, whereas Jack is maybe more average for a first base profile. Maybe that's like a negligible difference, and really the difference is just how you view the hitting ability. So if you're confident that Jack is going to get to his power, he's probably the pick for you. If you have some more questions about the approach, I think Nick Kurtz feels safer. Again, how much safety you can have with any college first base profile is probably up for debate. But if I had to pick, that's a long way of me saying I'd probably go with Kurtz.
Yeah, it's fascinating because they are.
And I expect Cags to go first on draft day, by the way. Like he consistently seems to be talked about in the top 5, and I think Kurtz, of these players in the top 10, might at this point be the most likely to slip. So if that matters for you for like fantasy purposes, draft capital, I would assume Cags is going to go first on draft day.
Does it seem like there are more two-way players now than there were 5 years ago?
I think two-way players probably get more attention now because of Ohtani. So we have always had a lot of two-way players in the amateur ranks. I actually think the 2017 draft class had a ton of two-way players. Okay. We actually had on our previous like high school American teams, we had two-way spots. In 2017, we had a lot of like candidates for that. And we don't have that anymore just because there weren't as many prominent ones. But we've got guys like Bryce Rayner, Connor Griffin, who are two-way players. Like a lot of players in high school do it. In college, you still have a couple, like guys like Carson Bench, who's an outfielder and a pitcher. I think Braden Montgomery, he didn't really pitch a ton this spring, but he was a legitimate two-way kind of guy. So I don't think there are any more. I just think there's the sort of Ohtani magnifying glass with everyone kind of looking for the next two-way guy, even though I don't really think anyone in this class will be.
People need to just, I'm sure actual scouts don't do this, but people need to just stop using Ohtani as a... he's the next Ohtani.
I agree entirely. I think Ohtani is like proves that he's the outlier. He's not like some bastion of things to come. He's just the outlier of outliers.
So I know your colleague Jeff Ponce is very high on Tennessee's Christian Moore. He obviously had a ridiculous season, culminating in a championship. How concerned do you think we should be about what Moore did prior to his junior season, particularly with regards to his hit tool?
Yeah, great question. The biggest difference for him this spring was really dropping the strikeout rate as much as he did. He made a lot more contact, which helped him get to his power more frequently. If you look at our grades, like we don't have like a super shiny hit tool grade on Christian Moore. I think I've got him as a 50 hitter and a 55 power moving forward. So hopefully we tried to capture just the offensive environment in general. But I think the one thing with Moore is he's been arguably the most consistent hitter in college baseball over the last 3 years, doing it in Tennessee. Even if he's going to be more power over hit in pro ball, he's consistently gotten to that power. He's very strong. He has a lot of bat speed. I think he has a chance to be a solidly impactful hitter. The question with me is more about like defensively. What's that profile going to look like? I think he's second base at best in the infield. He played shortstop a little bit early on and just has never really looked like a shortstop. I don't think he has the sort of arm for that position. If he can stick at second base and be a bat first guy, like it's not a perfect comparison, but a similar profile to like a Justin Foscue type a few years ago who was kind of bat first, second base. I think that would be cool. I think there has to be a lot of confidence that you get just seeing what he's done for 3 years in the SEC against great pitching. Certainly, he was one of the biggest risers down the stretch with what he did in the NCAA tournament, to the point now where he's getting talked about as like a potential top 10 pick. So I expect him to go at some point in the 10 to 15 range at the latest at this stage. He's kind of consistently climbed up and up and up. There are guys in the past like Chase Davis a year ago who showed pretty significant improvement in contact his junior year. And maybe that was more kind of a blip on the radar instead of a sign of things to come. I know he's struggled with his contact in pro ball since then. So, yeah, I don't think this completely overhauls your opinion of Christian Moore, but he has been a fairly steady performer for 3 years now.
Yeah, I think the Chase Davis, like the Pac-12 thing also just kind of is in the back of my mind there, just because it does seem like there have been, like you would expect a guy, like his third year in the Pac-12 to be significantly better than his first year or second year.
I think too, a lot of this, like there's a lot of confidence that I think comes because we have data now on these college players, and you can look at numbers that look just so much better in terms of chase and contact rates that maybe we get like overconfident in those numbers. But to your point, like when you're a junior in your third year in college, you should be better. And so maybe it's a case of like if you've plateaued, that is more concerning than getting really excited about steps forward.
So when I look at the scouting grades that you get on these guys, if I felt good about Connor Griffin's hit tool, I think he's the top ranked prep hitter on your guys' board. If I felt like he was going to hit, I think there's a case to take him really high just because he has the type of tools that a lot of these college guys don't have.
Yep.
So I guess the question is, how good do you feel, and how good do you think the industry feels about his hit tool?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question with Connor Griffin. I think in maybe not the exact same way, but it's similar with Bryce Rayner as well. Both these guys have really loud tools. They've got power. They're really impressive athletes. I think tool for tool, it's like Connor Griffin and maybe Vance Honeycutt in terms of like most exciting athletes and biggest upside potential in this class. And so if you are high on Connor Griffin's hitting ability, you're going to take him super far up. I mean, he's got a chance to go inside the top 5 because of that upside. For me, I never really saw him hit to the same level that I saw Walker Jenkins and guys like Max Clark from a year ago. And so they've never been at that tier, both for me personally and from the industry. They've never kind of been talked about in that regard. So I do have some questions. Like, is it going to be like a Benny Montgomery type? Is it going to be like a Joe Adell type? Like, I think Ben Badler actually brought up the Joe Adell comparison with Connor Griffin, and I think it's a really interesting one. Because he does have that sort of raw power, he does have that speed, and it really all comes down to the hit tool. Like this is kind of like I wouldn't say it's really a boom or bust profile, but it does have that sort of variance that some people are just going to be more hesitant to touch, and other teams who really value athleticism and tools and upside, they're going to love taking a shot on a guy like this because you want to get difference makers. But yeah, I would imagine these high school profiles are a little bit more polarizing than some of the high school players we've had in the past. Like you don't have a Jackson Holiday type. You don't have, I mean, even a Drew Jones at the time. I know he hasn't really panned out to the same way, but guys like that, like a Jordan Lawler or Marcelo Meyer at the top of the class, like it's interesting. I think both of them, like Connor Griffin had an outstanding spring. He hit really well. There were some scouts who thought he'd made good strides with like the swing itself and the mechanics of the swing. At the same time, though, he's facing Mississippi competition. There is a little bit of a kind of checkered history with Mississippi prep hitters that I know a lot of people in the industry are afraid of. And because of that, maybe you go with a guy like Bryce Rayner, who has faced SoCal pitching, where just the quality of competition is so much higher. But I think both these guys in the past have shown some questions with their hit tool. And really, ultimately, that's going to determine how good they are is can they hit or can't they?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of laid it all out there just in terms of the class itself with the prep hitters. It just doesn't seem that great.
Yeah, we've got 3 high school hitters who are ranked inside the top 20 right now, which would be like the lowest of any class I can remember since I've done this, going back to 2017.
Yeah, yeah. How about the college pitching? There's not a ton of that up top either. And the guys that are very high, like I think you can pick apart their stuff a little bit. Like not necessarily their stuff, but like you can pick apart like the high walk rates maybe, or just some reliever risk. So
I agree entirely.
do you have like is there a clear? I know you guys have Smith and Burns, Hagen Smith out of Arkansas and Chase Burns out of Wake Forest, up there, kind of next to each other. But do you have a strong preference between the two?
Yeah.
And just kind of maybe the college pitching in general in this class.
Yeah, I would say as far as like a macro look at the class, like there are a lot of questions with the college pitchers. Even Chase Burns and Hagen Smith, I think they both carry a little bit more reliever risk than you typically see with top of the class pitchers. Like I think from a year ago, all three of Paul Skeens, Rhett Lauder, Chase Dollander had more like classic starter profiles than either of these guys. I think you can make a case that Burns and Smith maybe have better pure stuff than the two of the three from a year ago. So if that makes up for it, that's fine. Trey Savage at ECU has kind of done a nice job establishing himself as the consensus number 3 college pitcher in the class. And so I think there's a player that if you want sort of that blend of stuff and control and starter track record, he fits that and fits as a solid middle of the first round talent in this year's class. But beyond that, I think there are a lot of questions. There are players who either have massive strikes questions, like a guy like Brody Brecht out of Iowa. He has great pure arm talent. He's a great athlete, but as soon as he's taken top 30 or as a first round arm, he will set like the new high for career walk rate for a first round pitcher. I mean, over the years, there's been a slight uptick in walk rate for college pitchers as maybe we prioritize stuff and stuff plus models a bit more, but it's really never been this high. And I assume Brecht is going to go in the first round. There are guys like Josh Hartle who started the year as a first round consideration and just like didn't live up to expectations. Ben Hess at Alabama, same thing. Like he's got great stuff and just didn't perform consistently. So if you want college pitchers in this class and you don't get a shot at any of the top 3 players who are probably going to go inside the first 15 picks, I think there are a lot of question marks for that class. Now, in terms of like your question about Chase Burns versus Hagen Smith, this is another really interesting argument that I think you can go both ways. We have Chase Burns ranked a little bit higher now, but they have both flip-flopped throughout the spring in our rankings. I tend to prefer Hagen Smith just because I like the fact that he's left-handed. I like the delivery a little bit more, and I also like the progression of his fastball velocity over the last 3 years. I think it's a little bit more of like safer. As I say that, Hagen Smith is the one of these two who has already had Tommy John surgery, and he had that in high school. Yeah. So that's a bit concerning. But for me, I love the in-zone miss rates of Hagen Smith's fastball and slider. I like his lower slot. But Chase Burns is a guy who's averaged 98. He's got a wicked slider, maybe the best slider in the class. He's also done a really nice job showing a third and fourth pitch this spring. And just in terms of walk rate and control, he's been better than Hagen Smith for his 3 years. So it looks more like a reliever, but he's actually been in the zone a lot. So both these guys have compelling cases. Again, if you go by draft capital, I expect Burns to be first, but it wouldn't shock me if Hagen somehow was first. They both should go in a similar range.
Yeah, Hagen Smith would be my pick over Burns easily.
I like that we agree on a lot of these players.
But there's a but. Hagen Smith, even though he got better with his walk rate each year, it's still over 10% this year. And, like Asa Lacy's walk rate wasn't even that high. So it's just kind of where's the danger zone for you? I know it's guys can get better, guys can improve, but for college pitchers, first round college pitchers, is a 10% walk rate, that's pretty extreme, or is that just kind of the way it is these days?
Well, this year, a 10% walk rate, it feels like, oh, you're happy with that because of how erratic it is. But you're right. It is like higher than you would typically want. I think Paul Skeens' walk rate was like around like 4%.
Yeah.
Typically, you want it in that like 7 to 9% range at least to feel comfortable. But I think that just highlights like both Smith and Burns just have more reliever risk inherently. I know a year ago, Chase Burns was pitching in a reliever role. Hagen Smith has spent a lot of time pitching in a reliever role throughout his career. I did a piece earlier this spring kind of just looking at the reliever risk of this class in general. But yeah, in terms of delivery, in terms of command, in terms of control, you're just taking on more reliever risk. And again, maybe it's a trade-off. Like you're getting more stuff. You're getting more pure stuff with both these guys than probably both of Chase Dollander and Rhett Lauder a year ago. I think probably like guys like Jack Leiter previously, and he's a guy who has not shown great control. I would have to look back and see what Jack Leiter's walk rate was at the time, but I remember him kind of coasting on this like pitchability righty tag for probably longer than he should have. But yeah, I think with either of these guys, you're not guaranteed to get a starting profile. They're going to need to continue making improvements. It's been nice to see the improvements they've made, and it's a little bit comforting the fact that Burns has had a pretty consistent walk rate around 7-8% for his entire career. But also, I think they're like the Asa Lacy concern you mentioned, like how much of that is from chase because your stuff is just so filthy and you're inducing a lot of chase that you're just not going to get as consistently at the next level. That's going to raise more questions.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Brecht earlier out of Iowa.
Yeah,
like I think for teams that really think that they can fix some stuff with these guys, he's got to be appealing because the fastball and the slider are just big time pitches. And then I saw, I can't remember if it was on BA or another site. I saw some concerns about maybe Iowa like messed with him and like there's another level there of like you could fix some stuff. And
yeah,
like is that, are you buying that or is it just kind of, I mean, I hate to bring up like George Claassen, but like he's broke out in pro ball after just, I think he walked more batters than he struck out at Minnesota.
Yeah, he had huge question marks with his strike throwing. So I think there are some teams that probably would feel like they have done a nice job in the past of getting guys just to throw more strikes as soon as they get into pro ball. The Rays would be an obvious team that maybe makes sense in terms of what they've done with their development and kind of the range they're picking in where it would make sense on talent. I know over the offseason, Brody Brecht, everyone was really excited to see him this spring because he was stopping focusing on football. He played with Iowa's football team as well, just a super talented athlete and wide receiver. And we're like, okay, like this is his time to like focus on pitching, take a huge step forward. What was interesting to me with Iowa is they worked on adding a slider variation to Brody Brecht. Like he previously threw kind of like a gyro slider, I believe. And they tried to add more of like a sweeping slider just to give him two slider shapes. They also worked on a split change with him as well. So they added 2 pitches for him over the offseason, which was interesting to me because I feel like in terms of pure stuff, he misses bats. His problem has just always been getting the ball over the plate. If he's making hitters swing the bat and getting ahead in counts, his stuff is more than good enough to dominate hitters at the college level. So I wonder if there's a chance for him to maybe just simplify the arsenal a little bit and just focus on repeating. He has such great arm speed. There have been some changes in like kind of how the arm works. I think the arm stroke is a little bit shorter. So just getting him more on time and more over the plate. To his credit, he has made improvements with his walk rate year over year, but still we're talking about a guy who's gone from like a 20% plus walk rate to 18, who's now at like 15%, which like we're talking about 10% being scary. 15% is not good. So he just has to improve in the control department. But again, if you're a team who wants to dream on an athlete and stuff, Brecht is the guy you would do it with. I just know for a lot of teams, he would not be in consideration for a first round pick because there's just so much risk to the command piece.
Okay, Carlos, I saved the worst for last, just in terms of what dynasty people care about, but prep pitching in the class. Is there like 1 or 2 prep pitchers that you're particularly excited about that you know, obviously we don't even have to go over all the risk factors, but just, you know, who jumps out to you as someone that you really like among the prep pitchers?
Yeah, we talked about this in a recent podcast I did with Ben Badler, but I really like Levi Sterling. I don't know if he's going to be a huge factor for you for fantasy, so I won't spend too much time. I think he just has a lot of these starter traits. He's young. He's got a lean frame, projectable frame. He's got a full arsenal. He can spin the ball. So, like, keep an eye out on him. If he does get drafted, and if you're like a team that you're happy to take on some risk and wait a while in prospects, I think he could be really good in a while. But the pitchers who are probably going to be the most relevant to like fantasy players, Cam Caminiti is going to be the guy who probably goes off the board earliest. He's super young for the class, was a previous 2025 prospect who reclassified, two-way player in high school. He's got raw power, but his calling card is kind of this really easy velocity from the left side. I think he's going to have a plus or better fastball. I think I might have even given him a 70 grade future fastball projection on our grades. He's got a good changeup. He throws strikes pretty well. The question with him is the spin. He's never really spun the ball consistently well. I know there are a lot of teams that really prioritize spin that probably wouldn't want to take him in the range that he's probably going to go. If you like lefty power profiles, Cam Newton's your guy. If you want some of that spin, William Schmidt, who we actually have as the top ranked high school player in the class, might be your guy. I think he has the best curveball maybe in the entire class. It's a pitch that consistently gets 70 grade future projections. It's a hammer of a pitch, spin rates up to 3,000 RPM, and he really has like shockingly good control for a pitch with that sort of depth. He also threw a lot harder this spring. He's been into the upper 90s when previously he was kind of low 90s, touching a 94. Another kid with a great frame. We don't have like a Noble Meyer or a Jackson Jobe or an Andrew Painter type pitching prospect in this year's class. So whichever one of these top players you like, there are maybe more warts to pick away in their profile with than typical, but there are some guys that have some upside, and the depth of the high school pitching is also pretty compelling this year. So there could be some intriguing guys like in round 2 or day 3 as like, or excuse me, day 2 as overpays who are interesting.
Carlos, this has just been fantastic. Very informative. Do you mind just kind of letting people know like what to look out for on BA, like what you're going to be doing on draft day and that type of thing?
Absolutely. So we've got a couple more mock drafts that are coming. So as we hear stuff, you'll get it on Baseball America and our mock drafts. We recently updated the BA 500 with tool grades. We'll have more updates to that list. Just kind of last minute tweaks. If any players withdraw, just making sure every draft report is updated. On draft day, we'll have a best available board. We'll have pick by pick analysis from Ben Badler. I'll be on MLB Network for day 1 of the coverage, so that'll be cool. But I'd say just in general, check out Baseball America. We got a lot of content for the draft coming out on the site. And as you like see these players drafted, and if you want to know more on these players, we've got 500 scouting reports, and we write up everyone who's drafted top 10 rounds. So anyone who's picked in that range, we'll have some information for you, so you guys can kind of figure out who's who and who to get excited about for either your favorite teams or if you want to target some players for your fantasy team.
Well, thanks again, man, and good luck on the coverage on MLB Network. The podcast is brought to you by Pick6, the new fantasy game from DraftKings. Use code RWPICKS for $50 in Pick6 credits with a $5 deposit.